Welcome to Truly Terrified, Paranormal versus Physics, where we talk about some really weird stuff and Joe, the scientist, explains how it's not possible, or maybe it is. I'm Lin and...
I'm Joe.
It's been all over the news lately about UAPs, or unidentified aerial phenomena. In layman's terms, that's UFOs. So first, have you ever seen a UAP?
Well, I've seen lots of things that I don't know what they are. But that doesn't mean they're UAPs. So a UFO is something that you don't know what it is. It's an unidentified flying object. Like, I've seen lots of satellites that are, they're probably satellites, but I don't necessarily know what they are. I say they're probably satellites, but they're unidentified when I see them. Mm-hmm. However, there's a different classification of UFOs called UAPs, where the military knows a little bit about them. They have like exceptionally low visibility on radar or like sight visibility. They have extraordinary capabilities or move extraordinarily fast, accelerate extraordinarily fast. They have extra qualities that then make them from just UFOs to UAP. Still don't know what they are, but you have a little bit more information. You ruled out like balloons, for instance.
Okay, so I looked up what a UAP is, and it said an unidentified flying object an unidentified flying object is any perceived aerial phenomenon that can't be immediately identified or explained. On investigation, most UFOs are identified as known objects or atmospheric phenomena, while a small number remain unexplained. Okay, so today I'm going to tell you some stories of UFO sightings and encounters.
Okay.
I'm sure you've heard about them, but I want to hear your feedback on them.
I think it's been a while anyway, so.
Okay, so the popular UFO craze began with a media frenzy surrounding the reports on June 24th, 1947, that a civilian pilot named Kenneth Arnold reported seeing 9 objects flying in formation over Mount Rainier in Washington State.
What year was this?
Rainier?
I think it's Rainier.
In Washington State in the United States. That was in 1947. At the time, he described the objects as being shaped like saucers, which led to newspaper accounts of flying saucers.
So you know what's really
discs.
interesting is we know what a flying saucer is now. Back then, they didn't have like the idea of a flying saucer. I don't even think they had like frisbees.
So they probably didn't.
So they seeing it, like someone out of the blue saying, "I saw something. It was shaped like a saucer and it was flying." And if there was no like news reports to bias him to that conclusion, you know, that actually, in my mind, makes me think that's a much better observation than someone now saying the same thing.
I agree. Even before that, though, there were Foo Fighters.
Yeah.
In a mission debriefing on the evening of November 27th, 1944, so 3 years before Kenneth Arnold saw the flying discs, the Fritz, that was just his nickname, Fritz Ringwald, the unit's S-2 intelligence officer, said that 2 pilots had sighted a red ball of fire that appeared to chase them through a variety of high-speed maneuvers. Now, you've read a little bit about Foo Fighters, right?
Little bit.
So the bulk of the Foo Fighters sightings started occurring in the last week of November 1944, when pilots flying over Western Europe by night reported seeing fast-moving, round, glowing objects following their aircraft. The objects were variously described as fiery and glowing red.
What year was it?
1944. They were white, some were orange. Some pilots described them as resembling Christmas tree lights and reported that they seemed to toy with the aircraft, making wild turns before simply vanishing. Pilots and aircrew reported that the objects flew together in formation with their aircraft and behaved as if they were under intelligent control, but never displayed hostile behavior. However, they could not be outmaneuvered or shot down. The sightings of Foo Fighters was so widespread that the lights earned a name. In the European theater of operations, they were often called Kraut fireballs.
Implying they were some kind of German technology.
Yeah, I think, yeah. But for the most part, they were called Foo Fighters, and the military took the sightings seriously. They suspected the mysterious sightings might be secret German weapons, but further investigation revealed that German and Japanese pilots had reported similar sightings. So nobody knows what the Foo Fighters were.
Yeah, and still they don't know what they were.
Yeah.
I don't even think so. Like, it's interesting because modern, like the most modern credible UFOs that are still unexplained, so not necessarily UAP, but still, though, as far as I know, most of them are not lit up, so they're not emitting light.
So
that's
it's just
one of the qualities that people attribute to the really mysterious UFO sightings. But they're not like, they don't say it's like a fireball, they're glowing, it's like this really bright light. There are some that are like that. Like, there was one, I think it was from the UK, and it was at night, but it was on a military base, and the guys saw this thing like moving around. They didn't know what it was. They like walked into the woods, and I think there was like supposedly more close. They got close to one that was like in the forest or something. So back then, you have the distinction between that it's something that's lit up. It's a different kind of sighting than the modern ones, but it's almost more credible because you didn't have so many sources of light. So like, you don't have guided missiles. You don't have like super high powered bright lights on aircraft. You don't have helicopters at that point.
or satellites.
You don't have satellites. Balloons are out of the question, obviously. I mean, hot air balloons did exist back then, but ball lightning, as far as anyone knows, very brief.
Asteroid shower or a meteor shower?
Yeah, but they travel in one direction.
Oh, that's true.
Super bright.
Yeah.
Pretty much can't ignore it, and then they're gone. Oh, and if it's like a significant meteorite entering the atmosphere, it's also potentially very loud. Sonic booms and...
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Very, like, you can't ignore it.
So the thing that comes to my mind is how terrifying it would be to be a pilot in 1944 and to see something that's not anything in your experience.
It would be like you lived in ancient Rome or something, and you saw like a beam of light, and you know, you're thinking, oh my God, it's God coming to smite the town.
Not a god, gods, because they had more than
potentially multiple gods. But that's like a really important one with the old sightings, is they didn't have a conception of what this could be, and the unique qualities are just like raw. They're the raw version of a sighting. You know, if I see something, if I went out and I saw a glowing saucer shape zigzagging across the sky, I would think, oh wow, you know, a UFO sighting. It's just like everyone says, whatever. If you transported me 100 years ago or whatever, it would be like, what in the fuck is that?
Yes, exactly. Soon after Kenneth Arnold, that's the guy that was flying over Mount Rainier. Am I saying that right? Rainier?
I think it's Rainier.
Rainier. Okay. Soon after he flew over Mount Rainier, I don't know, whatever it is, flying saucers became a daily occurrence, because then it was in people's heads, I think.
Yeah, that is really important, especially if you don't know what it is.
Yeah.
So there's like a novelty effect, and it's like copycat murders. Right. People do what they see.
Yeah. And so they see that. Also, I think there's the suggestibility of it, where you see like something.
Pareidolia. You see a face in wood or something, and you can't not see it after that point.
Or the white car syndrome. You buy a white car and everybody's got a white car. Okay, so it was almost daily they were seeing these, and then in 1947, debris of something that crashed near Roswell, New Mexico happened. So that was quite soon after the Arnold saw the flying disc over Mount Rainier, and so in 1947, something crashed. And decades later, conspiracy theories began claiming that the debris was from a flying saucer and that the truth had been covered up by the United States government. Those theories stemmed from the Roswell Army Airfield issuing a press release on July 8th, 1947, stating that they had recovered a flying disc. So that was stupid. Whether they did or didn't, that was stupid. The Army quickly retracted the statement and said instead that the crashed object was a conventional weather balloon. Okay, now I looked at the photographs that they released to sort of prove that it was a weather balloon, and it was so BS because they were large pieces of clearly a weather balloon.
So remember when the Chinese balloon got popped?
Yeah.
And it fell? It looked like a giant pile of fabric. I mean, the balloon itself is huge.
Right.
It looks like a balloon that's been popped. And that was a huge one.
Right.
I mean, imagine. That was a huge one with a lot of parts on it.
Right.
I do really have a hard time imagining that you would mistake something
especially since these were like, there was a large chunk of rubber, there was clearly, it just looked like a balloon that had been deflated. It didn't really look like fragments of a balloon or ripped balloon. It was obviously a weather balloon that they were standing around. So that seemed kind of absurd that then they kind of backtracked after saying it was a flying disc, and then now they're saying it's just a weather balloon. But people didn't get too much up in arms about it until 1994, when the United States Air Force published a report identifying the crashed object as a nuclear test surveillance balloon from Project Mogul, with the reported aliens being basically crash test dummies. Oh yeah, they said that they'd found aliens in the crash. So, okay, we're going way beyond, we mistook a weather balloon for a flying disc, and what are these bodies in it? And then to say, they're crash test dummies. Why would you need crash test dummies in a weather balloon? Actually, it wasn't a weather balloon, a nuclear test surveillance balloon. Why would you need that?
I mean, okay, so this is what I think. If it was a test of something, some technology, it is conceivable. You can imagine a scenario where they would want crash test dummies in the thing. It would look like a balloon, I mean, they want to see what happens when there's a failure and it's manned or something. So it falls and there's, you can conceive of that. It's strange they would say it's a flying saucer. Yes. But you can also conceive of like a scenario where there's a mix-up. Like some group hasn't seen it yet and says it's a flying saucer. And that information goes back to people who also haven't seen it, who validate it, say, yeah, it was a flying saucer.
That's true, except that the guy who said it, issued the press release, was somebody high up in the Army. So
now keep in mind, just because you're an expert does not make you not an idiot.
That's true.
But there's something else. It is conceivable that the military or whoever was at that point or at any other point lying specifically for other purposes. So like, for instance, to confuse Russia and who else would be in
1947 Russia? Could be who knows who.
About new technology, so to make it to obfuscate it, to make it more confusing, to divert attention away from something else. It's conceivable that they fabricated all of it, including the flying saucers at the previous
Mount Rainier.
Maybe even the Foo Fighters thing. Maybe. Although that true. Seems like that was independent reports.
And also it was not only American fighter pilots. It was Germans and Japanese also.
So, and it's important to say that they could also be doing that same thing now. Like the newer reports of what they now call UAP, that it might be all artificial, because most of the credible information is coming out of the military, like the Navy, and it could be entirely a fabrication. Like at some level of the management there, they have this plan and they go to some pilots and they tell them, you're going to say this, and they fabricate certain things, and it's to hide certain technology or something.
Right. So we really don't know. So in 1994, they said that it was this nuclear test surveillance balloon, but in the 70s, retired Lieutenant Jesse Marcel, who I think was involved back in the 1940s when it first happened, he said in an interview he believed the debris was retrieved from an extraterrestrial source. So in any case, we don't know what it was. We'll probably never know.
Really important is if somebody says it's from an extraterrestrial source, that's really suspect. So for instance, let's say it's in a super exotic explanation. Beyond aliens, let's say it's from a parallel universe or something. So not aliens.
True.
What's in it are humans. Really super exotic. Or let's say it's the explanation where it's breakaway civilization or whatever they call it. There's a civilization on Earth. All humans, super advanced technology, whatever. And that was them. There's nothing like, no way you can divide and say these are the true explanations, these aren't, without more evidence.
Right. So him saying that was really irresponsible.
Yeah, because he doesn't know.
And we don't really know, like you said, just because somebody is, has a position of power or well-educated doesn't mean they're not an idiot. So he might just be an idiot. But I do think it's interesting how the city of Roswell, New Mexico, capitalized on it.
Yeah.
And so the city's official seal is it features a little green man.
Really?
Yes. Now, when we were there, it was fun, but it was more fun in a circus-like thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't, it didn't appear that anybody was taking it seriously at all.
Yeah. And it's kind of like circus makes sense because it's like a clown putting on bright makeup and a honk nose.
Right, right. And it was just silly.
You essentially can't trust any word that comes out of a kid's mouth.
That is true. But one time, Christina and I were sitting on the back steps when we lived on Avenue I, and it was me and Jenny. We were sitting there talking about scary things, and the neighbor poked her head, and it was dark. The neighbor poked her head over the wall and said hi.
Yeah.
She didn't say boo. We screamed. We almost had heart attacks. Because when you're in that state of mind, so they already were kind of freaked out because they'd seen something streak through the sky and land on this farm, and they didn't know what it was, and
And they probably already heard stories of aliens and stuff.
Right.
And that was a quote, Frankenstein?
Yeah, it looked like Frankenstein's monster.
When did that come out? Because
that was
if it was on their minds, even if they had
1952.
just gone to the movie theater or whatever.
Yeah, who knows? I didn't look it up, but maybe Frankenstein's monster came out around that same time.
So one thing is, if I went ahead 100 years and saw and encountered like a giant mechanical whatever, what are the chances it would conform to my expectations now, what that would look like? Probably pretty low. I mean, it would be like if I took a modern tank back 100 years, they would think it would look like a tank from then. It would be rounded and, and probably have like green camouflage. It'd be weird to see a flat, angular, low detail and desert camouflaged thing.
Right.
That would be very strange. So the movies in the popular media that was coming out in that time, so what people would have been seeing, the characters, the costumes were really simple. They were made of like basic things. They weren't very complex. I don't want to say there wasn't very much creativity, but it's like they wanted an alien, so they get like a scuba suit and spray paint it silver. Right. You know what I mean? And so you have these very simple characters, essentially. And so that is what the popular image of what is possible. Like an alien, what's possible? They think, oh, it's a giant... When did the Day the Earth Stood Still come out?
I don't know.
Or whatever it was called. You know, with Gork or whatever his name is.
Orson Welles? No, what are you talking about?
No, the one with the flying saucer comes down, giant mechanoid man.
Oh, I don't know any of those.
Okay, so depending on what people were exposed to, generally though, they have a conception that's probably wrong for the reality.
Right.
If there really are aliens or giant mechanical Frankensteins, they probably aren't actually like that, you know.
Well,
I mean, to be specific, the reality is probably not like the media they've seen. Now, they might have seen, let's say they did see a giant alien robot, then they could have interpreted it also like they would interpret the characters, and, you know, the chances that it's really like that, I would say, are pretty low.
Okay, so we see kind of a progression from the Foo Fighters to the Mount Rainier incident,
So it's almost like inexplicable and just generally strange. Even now, strange. Like giant fireballs falling. That's even now strange. Flying saucers, from the perspective of then, that's very strange. Then you're getting a little bit more specific. Then at that point, you're developing like an image of, you know, a popular culture image of, and that's really important because that's going to guide everything up to this point. There's actually something that happens, I think, after a while, which is essentially standardization of those. You know, like if I went up to somebody and said, no fucking bullshit, you tell me what an alien looks like right now or I'm gonna kill you, and they draw a little green man, it's not like a joke. That is the only thing that comes to mind. Right. You know, or maybe it's like the reptilian thing, or, you know, giant Nordic
so
people,
everybody was really primed for when the Roswell incident happened to believe whatever crazy crap came out of that. Yeah. And then people just started kind of seeing ghosts, or not seeing ghosts, seeing aliens where they were not, there was nothing. So, I agree with you on that.
They're guiding themselves to this more particular image of what it should look like.
So I think that's one of the reasons why UFOs and UAPs have not really been taken seriously, because there's so many reports of silliness like this. You know, seeing a Frankenstein outside of town. Another thing that's interesting about the Flatwoods thing is that, and I didn't know this, but they have capitalized on its notoriety, and they call it the Flatwoods Monster, and they sell little dolls and souvenirs and stuff. So
that's another problem, is people doing it intentionally. Yeah. Whether or not it is intentional or not, people doing it intentionally and then amplifying it intentionally.
Right.
So that they can pull people in for tourist dollars or whatever.
So you can't really judge much of what's said. So these stories happened a long time ago, and what with reporting methods and investigative efforts being dubious, we don't really know what happened. And with human nature being what it is, the way individuals and communities have capitalized on the early sightings, it makes it hard to sort fact from fiction. But more recently, we do have some reports of UAP from reliable sources. You want to talk about that? Because I know you're kind of keep up on that.
So the reliable sources supposedly are like the Air Force and the Navy. There's been a couple, like, quote unquote incidents. A few years ago, there was the 3 videos that were released, and so there was like the Nimitz incident, which was like in 2003, I want to say.
Nimitz is a ship.
So yeah, it's a group of ships that were, I think they were performing an exercise or something, or maybe they were just traveling. It was off the coast of California, and they had been seeing these things on their radar. They have advanced radar systems at that point, not as advanced as nowadays, but they had been seeing these things, maybe in rough groups, even formations. They ended up sending a modern...
What year was this?
Like 2003.
Okay.
So I'm not exactly sure what they were using, what technology, whatever. So the pilots saw some weird shit, and the radar operators saw some weird shit, and later pilots came forward, and then the military made remarks on the matter, and then there were other pilots from the East Coast, and then there's been a bunch of stuff about around nuclear weapon sites, I think it is, about UFOs disproportionately being spotted around there. Like, generally, it's because it's from the U.S. military, and there's been other governments, official documents and everything with their own sightings. So the implication is that the military is being more pragmatic about it. They're not saying it's little green men. They're not saying it's gorks or whatever. They're saying, okay, we have reports of aircraft or something, drones. I don't know that they had drones like we do back then. Or, something they're observing that they can't classify specifically. They can't classify it reasonably in any category that they know of.
So here's a question for you. Do you know if any of the pilots who saw these things have ever come forward to talk about their experience?
Yeah. So far as I understand, there was a government project. The director of the project, he was the one who requested release of the videos, and then he left the military, and then him and a bunch of other people, some of which are credible. Like, there was a congressman, there is a astrophysicist who's associated with it, more credible people who aren't necessarily swayed by woo.
Not peeing children running up a hill.
Yeah. And they are focused on identification. They're not focused on it's aliens, we have to make contact or something. They're saying there's credible reports, credible witnesses, don't know what the things are. It's really concerning because we're pointing really advanced stuff at it. We should be able to identify what these things are, but we can't.
So 20 years ago, they had the capabilities to look at these things and try and ascertain what they were, and they were paying attention to this.
Yeah.
So don't you think that when those fighter jets went by the balloons that were recently shot down, don't you think that they used whatever equipment they have?
Yeah, nowadays they have very advanced everything, basically. Imaging, radar. They have whole suites of sensors that can do just amazing things compared to 20 years ago.
Right.
The recent stuff is super strange because it doesn't even match the typical pattern of a government UFO sighting. It doesn't even match, collect information. That's the one thing. they shot down the balloon after collecting information, essentially. They wanted to know what it's doing, where it's going, what it's responding to. There's a lot to it. And then they shot it down. Okay? And they shot these other things down instantly. Why? As far as I know, there was no like buffer period. They saw some weird shit on radar because they had increased the sensitivity, and so they now detected smaller things or whatever. They immediately went out and took them down. I don't know. That's kind of strange.
And if they knew, because they have this sophisticated equipment, and they did a flyby, they knew that it wasn't a manned aircraft. You know,
yeah, okay. And so if they know they can shoot it down without issues, because there's no people on it, then they know what it is.
Right. So why did it take 10 days for them to say, oh, yeah, that was just a weather balloon?
But they didn't say it was a weather balloon. In fact, well, there's 3 incidents. They may have said one was a weather balloon. I think the other said
one was a hobbyist balloon.
Radio club balloon or something. But more recently, they said, well, at least one of them wasn't a balloon. They said if I remember right, they said they can't say what it was, but they can say it wasn't a balloon, it wasn't aliens.
Well, right? That one congressman got up and he said it was a balloon. That's one of the problems.
One congressman said, you should be very afraid, lock your doors.
Yes, I know. Like
aliens, yeah, I know. You can see how it's like a virus that goes through people's brains.
But here is something that I thought was really interesting. In other times in our history, in the United States history, in more recent years, there was the Orson Welles thing where they did the fake program on the radio and people thought it was real. And there was true panic. People were terrified.
Yeah.
People didn't get terrified this time. They got mad.
Yeah.
They had a political opinion about the whole thing, but people weren't scared. I mean, it wasn't like people saying, "Oh my God, the aliens are here."
There's a faction in the UFO UAP community that has the idea that things like this are testing the waters to see if they can just come out and say, "Yep, there's aliens."
Kind of desensitize us.
Which. Again, I don't even know if there's any evidence for that. It's just completely incidental. But it is interesting that because of like 80 years of this, pop cultural conceptions of aliens, whatever, whether it's real or not, people are like, because of that standardization thing, they're like, yeah, little green men, that's not that interesting. It's almost like they've gotten comfortable with the aliens being around, even though there's never been any aliens around.
So do you think that if it really was an extraterrestrial craft and it was captured and someone displayed what was clearly some unusual life form, do you think people would be scared?
This is what I would think would happen. And I don't know that this is what happened, but this is my suspicion that would happen, which is like, it's super cynical, but they capture the UFO, it's undeniable. Oh, look, spectroscopy or whatever shows, oh yeah, it's like fucking neutronium, it's built of super advanced shit, it is obviously a fucking alien spacecraft, and here are the aliens, here's their anatomy, here's their brains, open them up, look at them, talk to them, yep, here's where they're from. They show it on the news for 1 week, and then they move on to the election cycle or something else. And people are like, wow, that's crazy. And then they forget about it 1 week later.
It's like 1984. It's like, all gone.
But, I mean, people are primed to do that. Because there's crazy news stories happening all the time.
All the time.
Maybe not that crazy, but...
So this is what I think they'd do. I think someone would capitalize on it. I think someone would find a way
Roswell,
to monetize it.
Could you imagine? They'd make so much money.
Oh my God. Yeah, crazy.
Okay, here's one thing. It's really important to recognize that it's the same thing with like the ghost thing. Anything that is more associated with everyday life is more prosaic, so like would be less surprising if you saw that as the explanation. That's just more likely. I mean, it just is. Like, okay, it's not aliens, it's the Chinese government has produced a super advanced aircraft. That's more likely. I mean, we have more experience with that. We know it's more possible. It's just more likely. You should be less surprised if it's the Chinese government having super advanced aircraft right? Even, let's say there's a lost civilization in the ocean. It's Atlantis. And they have advanced everything. That's less surprising. We know humans are already on planet Earth. We know that there are civilizations that have been lost. Not necessarily like advanced civilizations. And we know people can develop new technology. That's less surprising than aliens.
But there are people who do believe it.
Yeah.
And so they've been primed. So
they have extremely weak evidence for it, but
this is true. And then there's the people who are primed to believe that China could do something dreadful. You know, there's so many different ways that people could believe that anything could be going on. I mean, really and truly.
And the other thing that's really important is the modern idea of a skeptic is just as bad as a true believer. A person who has faith that aliens is basically the same thing as a person who has faith.
Right.
It's not aliens.
They don't have any proof,
If
yes
you
or no.
can only narrow it down to a set of possibilities, you have to assume all of them are equivalent under the evidence that you have. You have to have new evidence. You can't just like say, oh, look, because like when the videos from the military came out, there were people like hyper-analyzing the rotation of the aircraft, you know, all of it. And people building simulations of, you know, this was happening and the thing must have been here because they were rotating. And the best case scenario is you have like somebody who actually built the system that you're seeing in the video.
Right.
And they say, this is exactly what's happening. And so it's true. This is exactly what you're seeing. And here's the position of the thing and whatever. But that's terrible evidence to narrow the set of possibilities. You're seeing an object. You don't know what it is. Let's say the people, the quote-unquote skeptics, who say they're seeing a distant 747 and they're showing the angle and it's all true. That, you know, it looks like a 747, the angle's changing and whatever. But it's actually an alien spacecraft in the shape of a 747. That's ridiculous. If I walked up to the alien spacecraft and walked in and it's full of people and the pilot is a normal American, and I'd say, okay, it's not an alien spacecraft. It's a 747. But that just shows it's not like you can just say it vaguely looks like a duck, so it's a duck.
Right.
You say it vaguely looks like a duck, so it's probably a duck. Whereas if you're like in the vicinity of the duck and it's taking fat duck shits and quacking, then it's a duck, you know, you're sure of it. It's like the videos the military showed, it's still more likely that it's like an advanced aircraft operated by a person. But I mean, like, I'm only like 60% sure of that. You'd need more evidence to raise one of those possibilities up to like 99%. To be a true skeptic is to say, here's the evidence, and what can we, like, beyond shadow of a doubt say, not, oh, this is what it is because it's the most likely. You know, you're saying this is what it probably is, but we still don't have good evidence.
Right. And we don't.
And it's like that with all of these esoteric things. UFOs, all of that. It follows the pattern of extremely weak evidence that kind of looks sort of like, you know, it could be. But ironically, the other people have no evidence that it really isn't.
Right. I think that one of the things that human beings do really well is we seek patterns, and if something is not exactly fitting the pattern, we fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a lot of what has happened in sightings, I'm making air quotes in my mind, of UFOs over the years. That people saw something, it wasn't within their experience, but somewhere their brain went and searched through all the different things they've heard, and it must be a flying saucer.
And that's the issue with, like, if you know about flying saucers, you've already tainted your ability to see what it really is.
And I think the same thing goes for those other things, cryptids and ghosts and all of those things.
Yeah.
In the case of these balloons, or whatever they were just recently, the 3 objects that were shot out of the sky after the Chinese spy balloon, because that, I'm sure, was a Chinese spy balloon. They were pretty certain. They announced it right away. It was pretty obvious. I think, I would hope that the pilots didn't fall prey to that same thing that they filled in it, and I don't believe they did. I believe they knew exactly what it was, and I don't know why the government's not telling us the truth. And I think that's the thing that makes me angry about it. Not that I don't particularly think it's extraterrestrial. I don't particularly think it was a spy balloon. I don't know what it was, but I don't think we've been given the full story.
The problem I have with it is that they just haven't said. If they're being unclear, they're being strange about it.
The fact that they're unclear and strange, though, is telling.
That's the part that matters.
Yeah.
That they're not just being, this is what we know, this is what we can say. I can't say that it's such and such because it would compromise.
Right.
Like, if, what's his name, said, okay, that question, I can only answer part of it because, like, someone asked, what is it? Was it a balloon? He says, we know what it is, but I can't say what it is. Or, I can say it's not a balloon, that's all I can say. And then people go Freedom of Information Act and confirm it's classified or whatever.
It really felt very much like trying to conceal information, but it wasn't like trying to conceal it, like saying, you know what, we have to conceal this. We can't tell you right now. It was just weird. The whole thing was weird.
It's like trying to deflect when you don't have anything.
So when I think about all of the incidents that the government has been involved in, from Foo Fighters, which the government was involved in because those were, the military jet fighter pilots, and to Roswell, and to this, I think there's one overriding thing, and it's that this one seemed almost like they were trying to scare us. Because, that one senator who came out of, I think it was Senator Kennedy, who came out of this briefing and said, if you're confused and you don't know what this is, well, you're right.
Yeah.
Which is implying that in their briefing they were told that we don't know what it is. And then he said, lock your doors. What?
Yeah, that seemed kind of
That seemed kind of weird. And then, waiting 10 days to make any kind of really obvious explanation, which wasn't really an explanation, and it wasn't really obvious. The whole thing just seemed designed to make us feel uneasy, and I resent that. That's the thing I resent. Whether it was balloon
there's a whole conspiracy theory related to events in the past that the government or whomever presents a challenge. That's they construct this problem and then they present the solution to the problem in order to get what they want. So like, they want to go to war, send U.S. troops to Ukraine or something. And so they construct a reason so they can justify it. And whether or not it's true, I don't know. I have a hard time believing. I wouldn't place much confidence in that's actually happening. I think it would be pretty hard to keep that a secret. I mean, the conspiracy theory stuff comes from you saying, it's like you say, this is what happened, there's forces against us or whatever, and you are using certain piece of evidence inappropriately. And if I am a good skeptic and whatnot, and I say, it really feels like those were aliens in that sighting. I have not actually said, I believe it's aliens.
Right. I
have a feeling that it was aliens. I don't have to act on the feeling. Whereas a conspiracy, like a quote unquote conspiracy theorist would say it was aliens, the government is concealing it, whatever.
With absolutely no facts to go on.
And you don't need facts for feelings.
Right.
You don't need facts to say possibilities. you might be focusing on the wrong possibilities.
Right. And your feelings might be leading you astray.
Yeah. It's really important to filter your feelings. If you're talking about all of this stuff, you say, I get the sense that this is what it is. But then when it comes to into belief territory, you're filtering stuff. Right. So you're saying, my feeling is the government is trying to trick the people, convincing them that they need to go to war or whatever. And then you say, my belief is that they are trying to conceal some information for some reason. And you can see a lot's been filtered out. And then knowing is another act of filtering. And so, again, really important. It may seem like you sound like a conspiracy theorist, whatever. It's almost like being able to go to those places in your mind is actually a better thing. So like skeptics. A good skeptic should be able to entertain the idea. They go there and say, okay, what if this is aliens? What will this look like? What if there is a reason why the government has to conceal information? Or maybe they're not concealing information. What does that look like? And so like my feelings are, yes, they're concealing information for some reason. I believe they're trying to mislead people for some reason, but I know nothing. So everything's filtered out to knowing, because the knowing part is really important.
So is it
quote unquote in conspiracy theorists, it goes all the way to knowing all of it.
Gotcha.
And so, I don't think most people have that process. It's either all or nothing.
Well, I think that part of it is that a lot of people don't really understand the forces that are going on. So to make the leap from I feel to I know, there's nothing really in between, because they're not even aware of how much there is to know to get to that place of certainty. That's my thinking on it. What do you think? Are UAPs and UFOs extraterrestrial? Or are we being played? Let us know. Our contact information is in the show notes. And as always, if you have a story to tell, send it to us. Please share, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and never be so terrified you can't run.